I heard myself from back there. I got a loud voice, but that's cool. I'll move in.
I'm Steve Lamb. I'm here with the Center for Progressive Urban Politics at Politicon. I'm with a gentleman named T. West. I heard him speaking on a panel at Urban Game Changers, and he was talking about local economies, black economies, and the effect of immigration, legal and illegal, on displacing black people out of their communities and out of the local economy. It's really good to meet you. Now, what is your background? You sound like you're very well educated, like you're an academic. Is that what you do, or what do you do?
Well, I've done a number of things, but primarily, mostly in my life, it's been IT.
Really?
That's what I've done most of my life. But on the side, I've always done media things. I've always loved to write. So, musician also.
Oh, musician. What's your instrument?
Oh, guitar, keyboards, guitar mainly. You know, got 3 daughters, taught them how to play music.
Awesome.
Had a band when they were teenagers, and the oldest has shot up like a rocket, travels the world, has her own band, bass guitarist.
Wow.
She is, and entertainer, performer. Performed with Prince before he passed, and also she just got through a couple of months ago doing a show with Quincy Jones over in I think it was Switzerland.
Yeah, I understand he lives over there.
Yes, he lives over there. Yes.
So, when you were talking on the panel, you mentioned the 1965 Immigration Reform Act, which, of course, is something that's of interest to us. And you said that the 1965 Immigration Reform Act was mostly about black displacement.
Sabotage. Yes.
And can you explain that a little bit? That's going to sound odd to most people, because most people think it's like a nice pink fuzzy thing that the government did.
Yes. Okay, so in 1964, you had the Civil Rights Act.
Yeah.
That came into place. But you always have someone who's sitting back in the shadows preparing to sabotage what is intended to be black progress, which the 1964 Civil Rights Act was intended to be progress for African Americans. And it was progress for a swath of African Americans. Mm-hmm. But it was also sabotage because they were also working on another bill. And this was the Immigration Naturalization Act, which officially was signed into law in 1965, yes. And with this Immigration Act, it also tied into, like the 13th and the 14th Amendment,
right,
which was related to slavery. 13th Amendment related to slavery, the abolishment of slavery, except for in prison systems.
Right.
So, it also, when you look at the 14th Amendment, it also talks about, when the children are born of those who are enslaved in America, they are citizens of the United States.
Right.
Now, I was talking specifically about African Americans and if any other group, like Native Americans.
Right.
Okay. But it was not talking about illegal immigrants.
Actually, until 1920, Native Americans were not citizens of the United States. So black people actually were citizens of the United States before Native Americans were citizens of the United States under the law.
Yes.
Very interesting thing.
So
it very clearly does not apply to anybody born here.
Right. So with the Immigration Naturalization Act tying into the children who are born here in the United States, the anchor babies, that brought that into the equation. So when you're talking about anchor babies and you're talking about numbers matter. They matter. If you live in California, you ought to know by now numbers matter, because numbers are power, okay? While many whites are aborting their children, blacks are aborting their children, the illegal immigrants, they're not aborting their children. Now, the next generation, they may do that, but and a lot of them will, the next generation, when they become a little bit more Americanized. But for the time, no, they're not aborting. They're having 4 or 5 children.
Right.
Some of them, many of them, because of the benefits that they're going to get from that, especially in states like California, and many other states are also trying to become more and more like California. California sort of leads in that area. You had Senator Kamala Harris, who made a statement several months ago that the way where California is going is the way that America will be going in the future. This is Senator Kamala Harris of California.
I know who Kamala is. Yeah,
I'm sure you do. So what you have with the Immigration Naturalization Act, that brought in what we have right now, which is we don't have a comprehensive immigration bill. So this Immigration Naturalization Act, it helped facilitate the massive numbers, and we're talking millions, of illegal immigrants entering into the United States. Now, it's very, very important to understand and to know that, and ask the question, what drives this? What is driving this? Because if you're going to talk about solutions, you can talk all day long about this until you become nauseated. Mm-hmm. But in order to bring some positive change to it, you have to talk about, okay, what is the driving force behind this? Why is this happening? Because then you can say, okay, how can we circumvent this? How can we bring solutions to this? How can we solve this? How can we stop this, end this? And the way that we have to look at this is that it's largely economic. It's mostly economically driven. Now, which was no different than what slavery was. Slavery was driven by economics. And when it was no longer economically expedient to have slavery, then slavery was abolished. Now, most people think and believe that slavery was abolished. I'm going to come back to this Immigration Naturalization Act, but we need a little historical, little platform here to build on that. So most people think that slavery was abolished because people were morally it was morally offensive, and we don't need this in America. We have to abolish it. But that was not the primary reason why slavery was abolished. Most people in the South who were benefiting wildly from slavery. In fact, at one time in the South, you had the wealthiest group of people in the history of the world in the South. I mean, cotton was king. Yes.
People do not really understand how wealthy planters in the South were. And I only kind of accidentally discovered this while I was studying architectural history. And there are the first steel reinforced concrete buildings, residential buildings in the world, were built in the antebellum South in the 1850s. And these things were gigantic. I mean, they were like 8,000 square foot homes, which in those days was just mind blowing. And they were reinforced with ironwork. Mm-hmm. And that was like a brand new, mind-blowing technology at the time. It was very, very expensive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you had to have great money to do that. In fact, it was so profound. So America was great at that time. So when we talk about make America great, when you hear some African Americans say, well, America was never great for me. Okay? Well, and that's true. It was never great for them because they were the driving force that was making America great with that slave labor. So with the slave labor, the South became extraordinarily wealthy. And it wasn't just the South, because the products that were produced in the South, such as cotton, sugarcane, many other products. Tobacco, yes, can't forget tobacco. These products that were produced in the South, grown in the South, they were shipped up to New York. Mm-hmm. New York, the Empire State, the great Empire State, very wealthy. Where was that wealth being generated from primarily? It was sourced out of the South. So that wealth was coming up to some of the northern cities, making them extremely wealthy.
Well, there's a thing about the banking industry, too, that we don't talk about. Part of the reason, if you read Marx, in his economic analysis of the Civil War, he talks about the fact that slaves they had deeds of title to every slave. And you could take a mortgage out on your slave, sort of like going and getting a car loan on your car. And these slaves, these mortgages had balloon payments. And it's like no accident that most of the balloon payments were due right around 1860, 1861. And these Southerners there had been massive borrowing. They had borrowed against the value of their slaves to build those massive houses I was talking about. And there was just gigantic borrowing that suddenly they realized they had no way to pay off. And the North had benefited terribly in the interest on these loans, and now the balloon payments were due and they couldn't pay the balloon payments. And so one way to completely absolve themselves of the debt was to create a separate country, which is one of the things that was behind the Confederacy.
Which is the direction also that many in California are trying to go. So you see a history repeating itself. So, and that's an excellent point that you brought up. I wasn't aware of that specific.
Oh yeah.
With that. Okay, so I appreciate that. So what you had the buildup of this great wealth that also affected and was transferred into some certain northern cities, such as New York. And with this great wealth, this great buildup, what you had now hundreds of thousands migrating in from Europe, from Western Europe. They
Irish,
had
German,
yes,
Hungarian, yeah.
right, and later on it was people from Eastern Europe. They didn't allow them in until later. Italians, they allowed them in later. Okay, so but you had this massive immigration into America. They weren't primarily coming to the South. No, that's not where they were going. They were going to New York and the Northeastern corridor. They were going to those areas. But when they got here, before they got here, they had read in their papers, in their magazines, any type of media that they had at that time, that look, young man, if you go here, you can become wealthy. You can have a lot of land. You can be independent. It was just, hey, go there. You know, like a few decades ago, it was like you saw ads in papers, you know, Dubai.
Yeah, go to Dubai. Yeah.
Okay, that's what it was like in Europe at that time. It was like America.
Well, they had a whole propaganda machine. We did, you know, Horatio Alger novels. We used to export about, you know, the guy who through his pluck and his hard work makes it from nothing when he comes to America as an immigrant. You know,
right.
And so that was huge.
Right,
huge.
Right. So when they got off the boat and they arrived in these northeastern ports, these cities, they discovered, well, this is not exactly what we thought. These people, we have artisans, we have carpenters, masonry, and they're all black, but they're doing this under slave labor. So those who were coming from Europe, they said, look, we want good-paying jobs, okay? Good-paying jobs, and they could not compete with slave labor. Now, I'll come back to that, but let's fast forward to today. You see the same dynamics that are happening over the last 4 decades at least, of millions of illegal immigrants being allowed to come into the country.
And that is slave labor.
Yeah, they pay them just a little bit, but it's
they have no recourse to the courts.
It's the same thing.
Yeah.
Yes, it's the same thing. So, and you have to ask yourself a question, well, who are these people, these entities who are running all of this? Who are the profiteers behind this? Who are the ones with the incentive for all of this? Okay? And when you start asking that question and you start answering that question, then you're starting to get towards the solution, the answer to the equation. Okay, we need to nip this in the bud. I'll give you an example. A few months ago, ICE raided a facility in Texas, Load Trailer. Load Trailer had been raided also in 2014 by ICE, and they arrested 159 people in 2014.
Did they arrest the CEO?
No.
Oh.
Yes, that's right. Of course not. And that's the solution.
Yeah, I know.
That's part of the solution.
Absolutely.
So you know where we're going.
Yeah, I know exactly where we're going, to the man who makes the money.
That's right. So what happened at Load Trailer, one of the managers there says, oh, well, we'll pay the fine and we'll hire some more. The fine was $500,000. This is Load Trailer. Load Trailer is one of the fastest growing manufacturers of trailers in the United States, out of Texas. And what they had made was a conscious decision.
Wait. They got caught with 150 employees, and the fine was $500,000?
159 illegal immigrants, and the fine was $500,000.
Well, they save that every 6 months.
And they said, well, hey, look, we'll just hire some more. We'll pay the fine and hire some more. And some lawyers counsel that way. Just pay the fine. Yeah, okay. Your bottom line is far better, having them here. Just pay the fine. Well, there's an easy solution to that. Okay, just knock it up to $2 million. At a certain point, there's a threshold where it's like, it's not profitable for us to do this anymore.
Right.
So,
and arrest the CEO and the board of directors.
And that would be the next step.
Yeah.
That would be the next step. I would hit them with the $2 million. Okay. And
no, I would dispossess them.
You could definitely do it. I mean, if you need to send a very quick message, okay. For example, if you needed to immediately stop this latest caravan from where's that?
El Salvador.
El Salvador. Yeah, El Salvador. If you needed to stop that, if you had an equation right there where you go to the extreme level, here's the kitchen sink.
Yeah.
You arrest the CEO.
Yeah.
Well, hey, okay, when you see that CEO doing the perp walk, hey, that's a very big visual message. So what you had in the North, you had many Europeans coming in, and they said, we want good paying jobs. So many of them who came here, eventually, they became abolitionists. Says, we want to get rid of slavery because we want good paying jobs in the North. So the North wanted to get rid of slavery. Now the South, they were like, no, we don't. This is our cash cow. Okay, we don't want to get rid of it.
Right.
Wasn't the case in the North, but it was not primarily. Some of them had moral reasons for it, but that wasn't the primary reason for getting rid of slavery. And if it was, their reaction after slavery was abolished would have reflected that, and their reaction did not reflect it being for moral reasons, because after the Civil War was fought, many men died in that Civil War. What was said by private enterprise in the North to the federal government: you freed them, you hired them. Okay,
that was said. Yeah. In fact, that's where the Buffalo Soldier comes from.
Yes.
Yeah.
You freed them, you hired them. So to this day, as a part of that legacy, at least 70% of blacks work for government, and you have the various levels of government. You have the municipalities, you have the county, you have the state, you have the federal, you have that. But that's the legacy of that. So sometimes when people say, well, we need smaller government, okay, they have to be a little bit careful about that, because you do have a considerable number of African Americans working for the government, because over generations, that was the only recourse that they had, because private enterprise would not hire them. So you had that discrimination with that. So that was the reason for that. Now let's fast forward back up to this Immigration Naturalization Act of 1965.
Mm-hmm.
So you had the sabotage with that. While they were working on the Civil Rights Bill, you had some of these cats who were also working on this Immigration Naturalization Act, knowing that they could use that.
Out of the University of Chicago. It was actually written by the faculty of the University of Chicago.
Yes. That's right. So you had that was being put in place to circumvent what was intended by some, and some thought and believed would be advancement of African Americans in this country, when others had the ulterior motive of sabotaging it. And that's exactly what happened. So you had sabotaging across generations. You had sabotaging after the Civil War ended. You had that. You had, at one point in time, you had lots of black representation in Congress.
Yeah.
That was pushed back, where you had zero, you had none. And that was both a Democrat, Dixiecrat, and a Republican thing. I always say, the Dixiecrat never did drop the crat. In the crat, you got the rat. They never dropped it. So that's a little message in itself right there. They never dropped that. So what you had the getting rid of blacks in Congress at that time, after
Reconstruction ends and the federal government leaves the South,
yes,
and the South resets itself up, reasserts itself.
Rise of the Klan.
Rise of the Klan. Yeah,
that's right. Rise of the Klan, terrorize, burning down certain towns, intimidation, the whole bit. So you had all of that was occurring, and that was sabotage. Then after that, you had the sharecropping and Jim Crow. That was sabotage.
Which was slavery de facto, if not de jure.
In another form.
Yeah.
That's right, in another form. Another face to it. So sabotage. Then, of course, you move on into the 1960s, you have the Civil Rights Movement. But at the same time you have in the Civil Rights Movement, you also have the preparation for this Immigration Naturalization Act.
Well, and the Civil Rights Movement, there was a strange thing in that I think about a lot. In my town where I live in Pasadena and Altadena, and the black business community in Pasadena about 1960, somewhere in there, was really sort of getting to large enough numbers, large enough integration with, large enough customers, both black and white, large enough people trading with each other, that it was really becoming a very, very successful business hub in Pasadena, right on the border of Altadena. And they actually came in with community redevelopment, right? And they built a bunch of projects, and they got rid of all the black-owned businesses. They just like bought them out, goodbye, and those folks went literally all over Southern California. So you lost this gigantic core that we had. And, business cores, people don't really understand this, but business cores where you have a lot of people in business together who are very similar and culturally background, you have a lot of synergies out of that. And so we lost the those folks all lost the synergistic effects of their businesses being co-located. And I never understood that as a kid. It always kind of like mystified me why the businesses like didn't stay in Pasadena when they got the money and they left. And I really have come to believe and understand that was not an accident, that was intentional. They actually had government agents showing them businesses far out of town.
Yeah, and you do have that, the systematic program where you have private enterprise that colludes with government. You have that, and you've had that historically. You still have that today here in the 21st century with what had become at one time a large percentage or majority black communities. And, the term, of course, that's being thrown around, has been thrown around for quite some time, gentrification. You have that. And in some areas, I have stressed that the solution to that in some areas requires some key and some keen thinking among African Americans. For example, you have gentrification here in Los Angeles, some of the cities here. You have it in other cities across this country, Portland, Oregon, Seattle, Washington. You have that. Especially after World War II and during World War II, lots of blacks came into California and other areas of the country because of shipbuilding. They needed workers, they needed the maximum number of workers, and that's also at the time when they brought women into the workforce, was because they needed bodies. They needed people to build this military equipment. So many people came to California, coming from Louisiana, various other areas of the South. They came to California. They went up into the Richmond area, in Oakland, San Francisco. There's a pretty good book called The Color of Law. Got the author of The Color of Law that talks about that. In his intro chapter, he starts talking about that area up there in the Bay Area, and up there now, everything is now high tech in this particular area where blacks were. They were literally moved out, bought out, etc., with the whole deal. Now, that is articulating that situation, and for some, it's articulating what the problem is and was. Okay, but with some of this, there are solutions to it, and that's what I like to focus on more often. Is what are the solutions to these things? Because sometimes when these people come in to buy you out of this property, they're coming with very good money. And you may have been living, if you have a house in that community, your grandmother have a house in that community. And in California, taxes are just crazy. It's just absurd. Okay.
Thank God.
I couldn't live here. I could not live here. And then for those who can't pay the taxes, some of the other people, they got social programs for them. So you through your taxes, you're paying for them one way or another. Here you got a 40 cents on every gallon of gas you buy, state tax. Okay, I'm like, where I come from, it's $2.55 a gallon.
Well, it's worse than just the tax, because we have a formula of gas that the state of California has mandated for pollution reasons, and that reduces your miles per gallon by 10%.
Oh my God.
Yeah. And then they tax you on every gallon.
Oh my.
And then the roads are always tore up, so you're always idling for long periods of time. So it's all hidden taxes, and positive.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow, that's crazy.
It's a great setup if you're in the state.
That is so crazy. I couldn't live. I've lived here decades ago, I couldn't live here now. No, couldn't. So what you have is you have the gentrification that was happening in these communities, and a solution would be with these houses, these companies, and sometimes it's corporations that's coming in to buy that house. It could be a very nice house. It might be an old dilapidated house. Either or, they'll tear it down and they'll build multi-story occupancy facility there. So they come with good money. Now, if there is good African American vision and leadership, there's a solution. In the South, in the southern states, over 39% of blacks still reside in the South, the southeastern region of the United States. Over 39%.
Okay. I didn't realize it was that high.
Yeah, it's very high. But over a 10-year period also, there was an influx, a rate of 110% of Hispanics into the southeastern region. So several years ago, there was an article about there were lots of Hispanics that left California, Arizona, and places like that. Like, where did they go? Well, they went to the South. A lot of them went to the South. Okay, so
because the plantation owners still need slaves, right?
Well, it's still agriculture. Lots of agriculture there. Lots of that is there. So a lot of them they went to the South. So for that same 10-year time period, you had an African American growth rate, population-wise, of around about 4.5% versus 110%. Okay, numbers matter. So what Kamala Harris a few months ago, where she was talking about, where California is the direction that the nation is going to go. Okay, there is a plan, there's an agenda that is being pushed and promoted. Okay, and you have to address that. But going back to how African Americans can
what do you think? I have a theory about what that plan is, why they're trying to push down the numbers of African Americans, and it's a really bizarre theory. But what's your theory about why they're doing that?
Well, see, the United States government, even private enterprise, the Federal Reserve Bank, those same people who are behind that, they made outrageous profits off of slavery. Okay, all right. I'm not calling any names, but some of you know who I'm talking about. Okay, they made immense profit, and they control large sectors of America, if not all of America, really. Okay, so Trump came out the other day and made a statement about the Federal Reserve Bank, that whole bit, and that was really interesting. So
I prayed for him after that.
Yeah, you should. But if there's any president who could do that, Trump would be the guy who could actually do that. So that was good. I had no problems with that. Someone needs to have the gonads to do it. Well,
John Kennedy did.
We know what happened. Yeah, we definitely know what happened. But Trump's a different kind of chicken. I did a program entitled that. Trump is a different kind of chicken, and that's exactly what he is. He's very different. Trump is a phenomenon. Anytime you have a 5-year-old granddaughter, and this was 3-4 years ago, we're sitting down, we're watching Little Rascals, and me and her little brother, and she says, "Grandpa, that was Donald Trump." I rewound it. And sure enough, there he was, making a cameo appearance in Little Rascals. Okay? But a 5-year-old.
Interesting.
Okay? So what you have is a person in Trump who, and we're going to get back to this, but I have to mention this. You have a person in Donald Trump who is known as a cultural figure across at least 2, maybe 3 generations. Even with the younger ones right now. Of course, you had pictures of Donald Trump with lots of notable African Americans over the decades. And they loved him then, until he said, "I'm going to run for president, and I'm going to run as a Republican."
Right.
But
what's your theory about why?
Why they...
why are they... What is the reason to increase the number of immigrants, to dilute the black population? Yes. You started talking about the Federal Reserve and those folks.
Yes. The reason why is this: the United States government knows, and thank you for Remember, the United States government, it knows that it owes African Americans. Now, I have a 21-point plan. It's an African American national political agenda, 21-point checklist, a plan, and in there it also talks about restitution and reparations. It talks about that because all these other things were sabotaged, all of them, and this whole Immigration Naturalization Act, it was intended to sabotage that whole area where we were talking about African Americans finally getting some form of restitution for those hundreds of years of enslavement. And in 2019, 2020, you're going to have that 400th year commemoration of what happened and what has been happening. So when you diminish the numbers, you're also diminishing, who you would have to, in some form of way, pay out restitution to. Okay, so you're diminishing that.
You're also diminishing the number of people who feel guilt for slavery, because by bringing in vast numbers of immigrants,
yes,
and they say, well, I was an immigrant, I made it, right? So these people are not going to be inclined to allow the government to pony up.
Right.
So they're also creating a huge constituent group that's going to fight to say, oh, hell no.
Hell no. That's right. That's exactly. And you see that. Sometimes with the Hispanic caucus. You have the Congressional Black Caucus, and they think that, well, the big tent is a solution. I'm like, no, it isn't. And you've had decades showing that, no, that's not the solution. What you're seeing overall, collectively, you're seeing African Americans lose, not gain. It's being shrinked. Okay, more of you are going into the penal system, which the 13th Amendment, which Kanye West talks about. That's a trap right there. Yeah, you can be enslaved if you go through this penal system. Okay, so it was all about sabotage, and it is true that when the other immigrant groups come in, they come in once they learn that there's a way that they can get entitlements, welfare, and other social benefits. Then they go for that. Many of them, they will go for that, and then they will turn around and say, no, African Americans don't deserve reparations, and we're not going to agree or vote for them getting reparations because we have the numbers now.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So.
Well, we don't feel like we should have to chip in and pay for that, even though the place that we came to was built in large part by African Americans.
Yes. Yeah. Exactly. So it's very important, and they use the Immigration Naturalization Act to get there, because that Immigration Naturalization Act will tie into that 14th Amendment that relates to this anchor baby mess. California's big, and California's been big in California for a very long time. From Asia, from Mexico, and other Hispanic countries. Very, very big. So that's what's happening. And as African Americans, we have to demand, not ask, demand restitution for these things, because you cannot compete with millions of illegal immigrants. African Americans you can't. It's impossible.
Well, native-born Americans, white or black, can't compete with.
That's right.
It's amazing what it's doing to the economy. About 10 years ago, I work in the construction field. About 10 years ago, there was a group of Latinos who were in Chicago, and they worked for a heating, ventilation, air conditioning company. And they were in their van, they were driving their van, and they turned themselves in to the immigration service because they were so miserable and so tired of being poor. And they were basically slaves of this company. And so I found out that they were getting paid, a sub-minimum wage. They were getting paid $3.75 an hour. And so I did this economic analysis of, okay, there's 6 guys on this van, and what were wages, in 1979 for air conditioning techs, okay? And so then we look at the general inflation. Well, what would that wage be now? Well, then what are the benefit packages that used to have? And I figured out that each van they had full of 6 guys was worth $1 million in saved labor costs to them. It blew my mind once I added it up 3 or 4 times. Blew my mind. $1 million of van in slave labor costs. So that's, someone's making a lot of money on those immigrants, and they're lying on their taxes.
Right.
Because the cost of nothing went down.
Yes.
It's all through the sky.
That's right. It's profit.
It's
It's all profit. And it goes back to what we were talking about earlier. You have to arrest people who are behind it. You have to destroy the incentive. And then those who are behind it are the same sort of people, industrialists, who were behind it hundreds of years ago with the whole trafficking in slavery. There's a hell of a lot of profit in it. You see it. You see it not only here in the United States, but you see it in the old countries. You saw it in Libya after the 2011 situation with the overthrow of Gaddafi.
That's right.
You saw that there, when people were being enslaved, people were being killed and their organs taken.
In China, yeah.
Yes, right there in Libya.
Oh, in Libya too?
Well, ground zero for illegal organ harvesting is Israel. That's ground zero.
Is Israel.
That's right. And
that's weird. I've never heard of this.
Yeah. Israel. In fact, they won't even challenge that because they know it's true. A few years ago, you had lots of rabbis in New York, New Jersey, who were being arrested because they were involved in it. They were laundering money.
Yeah, I remember there were a bunch of rabbis laundering money.
Yeah. And it was related to organ harvesting. Yeah. Organ harvesting, organ trafficking.
I'm going to look into that. I've
Yeah.
never heard of this before.
Oh yeah. This is out there. You had several years ago, the Palestinian youth that the IDF would kill. Some of them, what would happen? They would not return the bodies to the family quickly. And when they did return the bodies to them, their eyes would be sewn shut because their corneas had been taken. In 2010, when the earthquake, and these are all facts, you can check these things out. In 2010, when the earthquake struck Haiti, Israeli Defense Force was quick to get there. Elizabeth Cohen, who was a correspondent for CNN, Elizabeth Cohen, it was sort of funny because Elizabeth, she's funny anyway. She's standing and she's reporting inside the tent, inside the Israeli Defense tent, and she says, she turns around, she picks up a box, and she says, corneas, what are these doing here? Corneas, corneas. What's the need for this? So that was in Haiti following the earthquake there. So it's a very what I'm saying is this: it's a very profitable industry, and you will always find some shady people who will traffic in that, just as you had shady people who were trafficking in slavery, and then the government actually embraced it because of the profits that were involved. So it's money. It's money. People throw their morals to the wind when it comes to money, and that's regardless of whatever persuasion you're coming from, unless you have some strong moral character.
Right.
Yeah. So that's what it's all about. But with that Immigration Naturalization Act, it was a big situation because it came on the heels of the Civil Rights Act, and it was an act that has, to this day, has adversely affected African Americans because, as you say, I'm sure you're familiar with the term, when African Americans have pneumonia, white America has a cold. Now the cold can progressively move on to pneumonia, and that's that is exactly what was happening with illegal immigration. For decades, illegal immigration has adversely affected African Americans. They had a cold at that time, and then it became to a level where they were getting pneumonia. And then white America started getting a cold, and then Donald Trump came on the scene. It's like, yeah, you're saying what we're feeling. So more of white America began to see that and understand that. Therefore, lots of people said, yeah, Trump, you're our man, because you're speaking to what we're actually seeing. So. And then historically, you could talk about empires that rose and fell. How did they fall? Well, this was one aspect of Rome, the Roman Empire.
That and financialization.
Right.
We're out of tape.
Yes.
So T West, very, very quickly, how do we get to your website?
Well, I'm Afrisynergy News. That's AFRISYNERGY. Afrisynergy News. I'm out on YouTube. I'm also on Facebook.
Okay.
So just Google Afrisynergy.
All right,
and
great.
You'll find that I've got it's probably over 42,000 subscribers out there. I've had a couple of channels that have been taken down, but that's okay.
No, we did too. I mean,
and so you know what I'm talking about. But we're the real deal, and I appreciate the interview. We're the real deal. We are the new thing.
Okay.
Not fake media.
Not fake media,
news.
real media.
The real deal now. And CNN, MSNBC, all those guys, they know that.
Yeah.
And they especially found that out and discovered that after the 2016 election.
Well, I think it's amazing. Sometimes I'm here at Politicon. I will walk by Urban Game Changers. There's a crowd of people, and I'll walk by MSNBC. And MSNBC, with all its resources and stuff, has a crowd the same size as yours, but they've got seating for like hundreds, and it's empty.
Yes.
And you've got seating for like 30, and there's 30 people sitting there, and there's people standing around behind them. So it's awesome.
Beautiful.
Gotta go. Thank you for the interview, T.
Thank
West.
you, Lam, Brother Lam. Thank you. Thank you so much.